My name is Chad Folk. I've had the pleasure of being a member of Westminster Presbyterian since my family moved here in the mid-70s. Now that was preceded by both my parents and my grandparents being members long before then. So I've had a lot of time here at Westminster Presbyterian Church. So Room in the Inn is a very unique citywide interfaith ministry that provides, from November 1st to the end of March, provides homeless services within congregations throughout the city. So that is currently what it does. The history of Room in the Inn, really, there's a couple of different lores around how it got started, but really our history starts with K.C. Tomey coming in 1982 to Nashville. K.C. formed a relationship with Charlie Strobel, who was the pastor of a Catholic church over in East Nashville. In 1985 is really the unofficial start of Room in the Inn as a ministry, because Father Strobel would invite the local homeless people in East Nashville to the parking lots and would give them peanut butter sandwiches, and they would fellowship and visit. In 1985, in January, it's particularly cold in Nashville, and one evening as he was giving peanut butter sandwiches, he was about to leave, and he had this conflict of guilt where he was about to leave and go home to a warm place, and all he had done is hand some sandwiches that were crumbly with the cold. So on a whim, he opened up the door at his church in East Nashville and let this small group of gentlemen come in. And as he did that, he sat there and was calculating in his mind what to do next. And he realized that he really wasn't providing hospitality if he was just staring at them. So he had a conversation and made the decision to leave them overnight, saying that the church had a service that it had to do the next day, but he would be back in the morning if they were wanting to stay there. So he went home, and I've heard a couple different versions of this story, but that Charlie Strobel has told. But he went home and had a restless night, thinking, "Oh my gosh, what have I done from an insurance purpose? I haven't let anybody know. I haven't asked anybody at the parish if this is allowed. And what is the physical state of the church going to be? And I'm going to have to go clean it up." So he went back early the next morning, opened the door, and found the gentlemen were all there. They were all rested, and the church was cleaner than it was to begin. So that was in January of 1985. The next year, he thought about how could this be expanded, and he reached out to 4 different pastors that he knew. One of them was K.C. Tomey. So the following January of 1987, Westminster was one of the 4 congregations that housed people during the winter. So that was the unofficial beginning of that. Westminster has continued to, as that program is codified, which is now serves over 200 congregations. And last year there was over 1,500 unique people that were served by the Room in the Inn program. But it's really neat to think that Westminster really was at the very forefront of a vertical spiritual thought that really came across as a very unique ministry. Westminster's role in Room in the Inn is one that's very critical. First of all, our location in where we are. Obviously, we're close to downtown, so it's very easy to get from 8th Avenue, where Room in the Inn headquarters is, to our church. But I think it's more than that. We have not stopped, Westminster's not stopped serving Room in the Inn since that time in 1987. It's the longest running ministry that the church has. But there's some very unique things about it. But Westminster's role, I've had the pleasure of being associated with the program really for about the last 20 years. And every single year when I host, constantly people come up to me and say, "We like coming here. The people treat us well. The meals are great. We're treated like somebody that's special, like we belong here." So I think part of it is the congregation has really embraced this, and they've really made it, not just a once a week program, but something that we do and do well. We've had some challenges over the years, just a couple different scenarios. One, when we did the construction of the church. And part of that construction, they're very intentional about having spaces at this wonderful church for all kinds of ministries, and one of them was Room in the Inn. But the space, we typically used to have all of the Room in the Inn downstairs, and that space, of course, with the north end of the building and the construction, that space was being renovated. So for about 6 months, there was not going to be any access to the building. And that went to the session, and the session made the decision to pray over it, but it looked like we weren't going to be able to provide Room in the Inn services. I got a call from a couple of the session members that night, just sharing with me what my thoughts were. Well, as Room in the Inn coordinator, I of course was just absolutely conflicted, knowing that we were going to have this great new building and this great new place so we could have guests come. But I just really felt like Westminster needed to provide that because of our proximity, because of what so many of the guests, and because that Room in the Inn had come to rely on us since 1987. In that week, we got a call from Vine Street Christian about some of their struggles of whether they were going to be able to maintain Room in the Inn ministry. Donovan called me, and he and I went over and met on a rainy day with their pastoral staff, and they were having challenges because as a part of their sale of their property to Montgomery Bell Academy, they also sold their van. So they had no way to be able to get guests to and from. It was a very spiritual scenario where the session prayed about it. Within a week, we got a call from Vine Street. We didn't have a previous relationship with them. And in a very short meeting agreed that they were going to allow us to use their facilities, and we were going to continue our Room in the Inn ministry, and we were going to use our van to bring guests to Vine Street on days outside of Wednesday night. So there was a scenario that, for 20 weeks, we were able to continue to have our ministry with Vine Street, as well as to be able to provide transportation so Vine Street could prepare that ministry. And I think that's so important when you think about Westminster's role, because Room in the Inn, there's very few ministries that allow all kinds of different churches to come together. Because Sunday, every night of the week, not just Sunday, churches, regardless of whether their thoughts on baptism or communion or the age of confirmation, they come together and provide these services. It's a very ecumenical ministry that churches can come together. And here's a scenario specifically where Vine Street and Westminster did. And we're still doing it today. We still use our van and take guests over to Vine Street years after that happened. So the second challenging time that Westminster had with Room in the Inn was during the pandemic. Of course, for a lot of good reasons, the church was inaccessible for a lot of ministries that we had. And so the decision was made that if we weren't going to have children here, it probably didn't make sense to have homeless guests here. But the church really felt a calling to how we could continue to serve, because there was as much of a need for homeless services during the pandemic as there was before. You could argue that there was more just in terms of fundamentally providing nourishment and food, et cetera. So our staff went and had several calls with Room in the Inn, and we actually agreed to send healthy hosts from Westminster to go to Room in the Inn campus, and we hosted on our same night, Wednesday night, actually at the Room in the Inn facility. Of course, they're not set up to have overnight facilities there. They operate the largest part of their services from 7 in the morning till 8 at night. So we actually had guests that would go over there and spend the night there. And I tell you, the number of people that stepped up, and this is very much part of our heritage in providing all kinds of ministries, but certainly Room in the Inn, but the numbers of families that stepped up and provided meals and breakfast and lunch and dinner, I mean, there was more than we could sign up to do it. And I had the pleasure of going over there to do that 2 nights. It was different not being in our church. We were having dinner in an art room there, but the guests there could not have been more grateful that they had an opportunity to be around people. So we kept the ministry alive in a slightly different form, not at church, but we found a way to make sure that Westminster was still able to support that need that we've had since 1987. Okay. Yeah, the number of stories that have come through the Room and Inn ministry. They're just staggering. First of all, my involvement in this ministry started when Bill Yancey asked me to help and be an overnight host shortly when I moved back to Nashville. I was 2 or 3 years out of college. Certainly my late nights were not spent in churches at that phase in my life, and he asked me to be an overnight host. I ended up hosting with another gentleman who I did not know, and I found the experience to be absolutely delightful. I agreed to be an overnight host for the next couple of years, and then when Bill was thinking about doing something different in terms of coordinating the ministry, he asked me to help lead the coordination in terms of being kind of the lay connector between the church and Room and Inn. It was at that point that I realized how unique this was, because I can't think of another ministry that allows for different people of all different circumstances and age groups to participate. For instance, I love hearing stories of families that young children can help the moms and dads bake cookies or put an apple in a sandwiches together and put them in a paper bag. Families can come and host, in the stories of children sitting around the table with these guests. And our girls grew up, and the most exciting times that they had were having the opportunity to come and serve at Room and Inn. This past March, I served with Ralph Wheeler, and there was a family, the Flynn's, who I had not met, and they brought their son and their daughter, and their son and their daughters made these placemats out of just construction paper, and they wrote Bible verses on them, and they put them on the table. And several of the gentlemen went and read every single one of the placemats and looked at the pictures that their children had drawn. And over dinner, there was one man that was reading one of the stories out of the book of John, and he ended up telling the whole story about the book of John and about what the verse meant. And it was like this mini Sunday school broke out just because the Flynn family decided to do something there. But there's something for everybody in this ministry, whether it's driving the bus, whether it's serving an overnight host, whether it's making sandwiches, maybe putting together breakfast. I think my strongest memory that I have from being a part of the Room and Inn ministry is about 6 years ago when Christmas was on a Wednesday night. I was coordinating the ministry, so I felt like I really couldn't ask for somebody else to give up a Christmas night, and it was a conflict. Christmas nights were a lot of fun in our family. We would go up to my dad, Jody, and my stepmom, Jody's house, and everybody would come over, and the cousins would come over and open lots of presents and play Dirty Santa and have a beverage or two. And it was really had consternation because my kids were young. I mean, do you take that time away that it's special in Christmas? But my wife Katie and I sat down and we said, we've been asked to be a part of this ministry, and we need to talk to our girls about this is going to be our Christmas. And so we sat down with them, and my girls said, we want to be with you, and if that's what we're going to do, then we're going to do it together. So I called my aunt and uncle, Ben and Laura. I called my dad and Jody, and we decided that we were going to take our Christmas to Westminster. And we had it in the fellowship hall. We brought china, we brought glasses. And what's interesting about that is inevitably at the Folk family Christmas, somebody will bring out a guitar and play music. And after dinner, two of the gentlemen went right outside of the fellowship hall where there was a piano sitting there, and it was the most delightful version of Christmas caroling that I could remember. But that Christmas, realizing that it wasn't just about what our perceptions were, but being able to take a part of a ministry that Westminster had been a part of for years, getting to embrace it. And if you ask my girls today what one of their favorite memories were, they'll think about that time in Westminster, getting to be a part of it. And the guests were as much about that because they brought as much Christmas cheer as we did. So Westminster is always going to be important to Room and Inn. in the consistent we see we've had in 35 years. But the fact that we've had so many great leaders that have stepped up, Ralph Wheeler now is coordinating with a whole committee of lay people. I don't see any reason why Roman Ann won't continue to be successful at Westminster for another 35 years.